Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just watched the 2020 Best Feature Documentary Oscar winner.
Yes.
American Factory, directed by Stephen Bognar and Julia Reichert. Documentary makers you are familiar with, I think, or a bit
Yes,
familiar.
I think they've won several Academy... Well, she's won several Academy Awards before for Union Maids and something else. And Union Maids, if I remember correctly, was also about unionization.
I'm just having a quick look at... No, she's won one Oscar. She's been nominated before. She was nominated for Best Documentary Feature for Union Maids in 1976 and Seeing Red in 1983 and The Last Truck, Closing of a GM Plant in 2009, which is a film that focuses on the same factory that this film focuses on.
Right.
This used to be a GM factory. It closed and it reopened as this Fuyao Glass factory, and that's what this film is about.
Yeah.
And he also won Oscar, same is for this film, a nominee as well for The Last Truck. He worked with her, and that's it.
Right.
So that's their Oscar
so
history.
very impressive documentarians.
And this is a really impressive documentary.
That's fantastic.
I think on a filmmaking level, it moves beautifully. It's narrated very, very lightly, no voiceover narration, and just the occasional bit of on-screen text. But actually, the film just lets the people tell their story.
Well, that's their style, and that is like a key characteristic of direct cinema, which is where they both come from. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was... Voiceover is meant to be like a voice of God kind of thing that unifies everything and that tells you what to think about something. And not having voiceover leaves it more open.
And this has been produced for Netflix, and it's available on Netflix. And the production company, or one of the production companies, is Higher Ground Productions, which is the Obama's production company.
Oh, right.
Barack and Michelle Obama. And that made me think, because it's never pointed up in this film that this is happening during the Obama years. Right? And I think part of it is that you can kind of see if the Democrats, and if the kind of the second coming president could let American workers' lives kind of get so bad, is it any wonder that they voted for Trump in 2016, I kind of thought. It's not something that the film approaches, though. You never hear mention of it. You just know it's happening during those years.
Yes. I don't know, because one of the things that the film does is, first of all, it really strikes fear, at least in me, about what the conditions in China are. I mean, we're told that employees work 14 hours a day, that they get 1 or 2 days off a week.
A month.
That they only get to go see their families at most twice a year.
Yeah.
So there are people who are raising children, and basically it's the grandparents who are raising the children because they're working and they can't see them, or it's the wife who's, there's a lot of women working as well, so in this factory. So the conditions are really awful, the safety standards are very bad, they're really treated like in a military fashion, i.e. they're basically all disposable. They do military maneuvers before their shift, which is like,
they have roll call and they have pep talks.
Yeah, it's like a bad sci-fi films, and they're being barraged constantly by propaganda from the company, which appeals to their nationalism, to their patriotism. So it's really like a nightmare vision of a society, and it's awful. And so it's no wonder that there's a culture clash when they try to implement this in America. On the other hand, kind of what we see throughout the film is the factory loses. It does not get unionized. The company bribes them with $2 more in wages. It hires specialists to prevent the union from taking place.
Yeah, union avoidance specialists.
Yes.
And the film points out this has become a growing industry since the 70s in America.
And it also points to the correlation between the increase in these companies' profits and the decrease in workers' rights and wages. Yeah. So it's a very, very powerful film.
So I suppose we should point out the central focus of this film isn't the factory in China. That's a visit that higher-ups at the American factory, they're taken there. So the Chinese have invested in this American factory. Like I say, it used to be GM, it closed in 2010 or so, reopened under this Chinese company, Fuyao, making automotive glass. And I think it's interesting that a lot of Chinese workers are brought over to work on the factory floor. There are a lot of executives as well, but I think it's great that the film doesn't indulge very much, maybe a little bit later on as tensions grow, but certainly right at the start, not at all, in a clash between Chinese and American workers of the same level, right? You would kind of think what the higher-ups in any kind of hegemony power system want is people at the bottom to be fighting each other. And I'd bet you any money that there were people, low-level workers, who were resistant to the Chinese coming in. But the film will not show you that. What the film shows you is them getting along, making friends with the Chinese, taking them to shoot guns and fish and all the rest of it. That's what you're showing at the start. The film won't indulge in them having a problem with each other.
But at the end, you do get, this thing about Chinese superiority, or this doesn't work in America. The cultural conflicts are made very vivid. And actually, there's that very telling incident where somebody says, you see this guy? Yeah, we get along really well. In 2 weeks, he'll be out.
Yes, but I think that what I'm trying to point up is that the person who says that is one of, well, to an extent, one of the high. He's not an executive, I don't think, but he is a boss. But the conflict that the film does depict quite strongly and indulge in is between the higher-ups and the lower-downs.
Well, between the Chinese higher-ups and the American lower-downs, because actually you don't see any kind of Chinese resistance of the lower-downs to that process either.
No, you don't. Although you do see, when they take that visit to China, there is a moment given to a Chinese factory worker who talks about how hard her life is.
Yes, but how lucky that she is to have that job, she says also.
Yeah, she does. But there's a sense, I think, in there of grinning and bearing it. And she says, I have no choice.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to establish here is that there is a distinct difference. So you can't just eliminate the Chinese-American conflict. It's true that it's largely between the higher-up Chinese and the lower-down Americans, but there's no resistance or, by the Chinese workers at all. And actually, all the Chinese workers are bosses. They're all supervisors of their sections. They're not just kind of employees.
Yeah, I know what you mean. With the Wong guy, who is the one I think you see going and shooting guns and stuff early on. He's about as low in the food chain, as it were, as the Chinese workers get. Later on, you see him in his apartment looking at a photo of his family. He can't see his family. He's been away for a long time. He misses them. He talks about crying. I can't say that to any of my friends because...
He's also careful not to criticize the company, which I think speaks a lot. So I think you see people caught up in this 1984 type situation, really, where a lot of things can't... You see American workers speaking their feelings and speaking what they see as their conditions of existence. You don't see any of the Chinese workers doing that.
To each other, you mean? Because he does talk to the documentary makers about that, like I say.
No, he's talking about the documentary filmmakers about his feelings and his family, like, how he misses his family. He's not talking about his working conditions the way that all the American workers do.
Okay.
So I think that's important. That's significant. So I think the film is trying very hard not to be racist, and I think it succeeds. But nonetheless, it also points out incredible cultural differences, between one and the other. I think that person who you're referring to is one of the few that you see speak individually.
Yes.
You often see like the Chinese in groups, kind of. Whereas often the Americans are alone and they're speaking.
Yes, they do speak more directly to more of the American workers on a one-to-one basis. You're right. You don't see that so much with the Chinese, but I think you get in elements of it.
Yes.
The other thing is that you point out there's a conflict. The strongest conflict is between the Chinese higher-ups and the American workers, which I think is true. But the American higher-ups do have a kind of an element of participation, particularly that one guy, Kurt, I think his name is. Who is such a prick.
They reminded me of those, rabbis who led Jews to the ovens. It's collaboration in the extreme, and such sucking up. It's really revolting to watch.
Yeah, so when the Americans are invited to China to see how the Chinese do it and maybe take back things that they can implement in the American factory, there's this one guy, I think his name is Kurt, who you see him speaking to a Chinese employee as well, but he's fluent in Chinese, talking about how lazy American workers are. Yeah. And then when he goes back to America, he tries to implement a pep talk and says, you stand here, I need you to stand on 3, I need you to stand on 2, like trying to get his workers in order. They're not really interested. And he's being such an officious... Like I said to you, he reminded me of Gareth from The Office. Like, a little bit of power and he thinks he's amazing.
Yeah.
And no one's really interested.
I think it's worth saying that in China, what you saw was a military formation. It was like being in the army. You know, people stood up and all in unison, all in step, you know, having to declare their number. So number 1, number 2, they're a number. And of course, the idiot tries to implement the same thing in the American factory, and nobody's having it. And actually, everybody's body language, instead of being, you know, erect and upright and looking in the same direction, like in the army, with their legs apart, they are like soldiers in the factory, those guys. Well, of course, that's not going to happen, you know, in the American factory. They're not soldiers.
And of course, he has absolutely no idea what he's doing anyway, and he has nothing to say. Yeah. But still, the idea that he wants to implement that he thinks this will be a great thing.
I know, he's such a moron. Of all the ideas that you could bring back, that's the one?
And I think it's interesting that the other American executives that go to that trip, you see them having... Some of them are they enjoy sharing the culture and meeting other people, and you have that one guy who's brought to tears by, you know, we're all the same underneath, aren't we? Yeah. And I think he has kind of a moment. I kind of liked him. Most of them have, to me, I thought had kind of a raised eyebrow thing going on. Like, they have no safety standards here. They don't know what they're doing. You'd never get away with this in America, is part of the thing.
Yes.
And actually, a couple of those you see later on having been fired, I think, because they show up at the UAW union meeting when the workers are trying to unionise. Because there's that point where a couple of higher-ups are laid off and replaced with Chinese executives.
Just paints such a poor picture of America as well. You know, so the Americans who go to China, who are all supervisors, are all relatively high up in the factory system. They're all fat, which I think speaks to a structure in America. I mean, I'm not kind of pointing to an individual fault or anything. It's not, I don't want to personalize it. But the fact that they're all fat speaks to problems with America and food, you know, and lack of safety standards and lack of food standards. And then, of course, aside from that, they're all very poorly dressed. They all arrive in T-shirts or, you know, chinos, or the shirts are all like they're not pressed. There's a kind of a different sense of occasion. Yeah, there's a mismatch. So all of the Chinese are in these almost uniform, actually. They're all wearing suits, but it's all the same color suits. It's all like this navy blue, very sharp, yeah. So I think kind of that does speak to very significant cultural differences that don't speak well for either culture, actually, if I think about it. Though what's nice and what I love about this film is the way that it treats everybody with dignity and respectfully. Yeah, it doesn't make fun of anybody, right? So I loved that all of the American workers, like, they're all shown to be intelligent, smart, hardworking. You know, they're caught in kind of conditions not of their own making. You know, their life is shown to be really hard. So, for example, you're shown this one woman who's lost her job, and she's now living in her sister's basement. And then she finds her own flat, and you see her trying to make it nice and pretty. And she's super smart and interesting, yeah. So I like that respect that the film has for its subjects.
Yes.
And also, I love that the imagery, it has a poet's grace, yeah. Like, there's an attempt to make kind of what you see symbolic and beautiful is maybe some bits are beautiful.
Oh yeah.
You know. So they always go for the most interesting and evocative composition and image, especially at the beginning, right? The sense of what a factory is. It's filmed like a kind of a temple in a way, right? Like, obviously it's all iron and steel and space, yeah, but it's also made to be quite beautiful. Yeah.
I thought that one shot early on that we both remarked upon of the kind of hangar, vast place, that to me spoke of like a mausoleum, like a sarcophagus.
Well, okay,
know? That's what that kind of brought out to me. That's interesting.
So, but it intersects a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, massive symbolic structures, you know.
And it's the centre of the town. You see these shots, people driving around, and they always point out that's the FGA factory.
Yeah.
You can always see it. There's a big logo, and it's like it is that thing of everyone in the town works at this place.
Yeah.
You know, it is the centre, and you can also tell when the place closed down as part of GM, it was this massive loss to the entire place. You have that meeting right at the very start when they're saying we're going to reopen this place. Everyone's there trying to get the job there, basically, and most of them, I think, are getting their jobs back, handing in their resumes, saying, I've got all this experience.
Yeah, well, they're getting jobs back at less than half the pay.
Yeah, they talk about they were getting like $28 and change.
As opposed to 12.
Yeah, with 12 is what they're getting now.
So, that's a huge cut.
And you have this thing, the guy at the end just kind of lamenting, those days are gone, we're never going to be paid that much again.
And he's right. So the film tells us at the very end that over 300 million jobs are going to be lost by the year 2030 due to mechanization.
Yeah, worldwide.
375
million, that's the population of the US.
And that basically countries, the rich, and workers are going to have to come up with an agreement on how to manage this change that's going to be seismic, really. I think something like real wages in the US haven't risen since the 70s, whilst costs have gone up. So there's a huge reduction in people's disposable incomes and in people's style of life. And the film tells you it's going to get worse.
And the theme of automation, it kind of made me laugh because it comes in right at the end. The whole thing up until now has been how the workers are treated. And then it's only in the last minute of the film that you have the Chinese executives and the chairman walking around the factory saying, we've got a mechanical arm here, that's replaced 4 workers, I'm hoping to replace 4 workers by July over here. That's right at the very end. And so it's like this kind of extra depressing button on the rest of it that goes, actually all of this is kind of futile because we're all going to lose our jobs anyway.
No. Well, but I'm not sure I wouldn't come to that conclusion because I think the question for me that the film asks, is it better to turn people into robots or to replace them with robots?
But yeah, there's all this talk about I'm grateful for having a job and so on and so forth, and there is an element of people talking about taking pride in their work, but then they also talk about being given instructions by their Chinese supervisors and saying, well, why? And there's a conflict, I think, in kind of between enjoying your work, finding meaning in your work, and getting bored by the repetitive nature that is meaningless. There is a conflict that isn't resolved, I think, in the way that a lot of these workers think.
And the model that you're showing, which is how the Chinese workers doing, it is robotic. It is like, all of these choreographed movements in unison, that are entirely repetitive and never ending, for up to 12, 14 hours a day. And to me, that does speak of turning humans into robots. And that's how the company is efficient.
But that is why those couple of moments that I pointed out with the Chinese workers being speaking about their thoughts and lives are important, because I think it's important to, as you said, kind of show them dignity and humanise them.
Oh, sure. But nonetheless,
it would be so easy to fall into a stereotype of their robots and the Americans have inner lives.
The manager's idea, the chairman's idea of what a good worker is someone who behaves like a robot.
Yes.
Yeah, and is inexhaustible, right? Like a robot, right? So it's ironic then that, the actual workers are replaced by robots.
Well, it may be ironic, it's not the right word, it's predictable. The thing is, for a capitalist, for a business owner, a person, a human being, is basically the worst thing you can spend money on, because they're unpredictable, they cost money, you have to give them benefits, they fight you. Machines don't do any of that.
It's the way certain directors feel about actors. That's why they prefer animation. Yeah. So, but is that a bad thing? That's, I think, what the film, in a way, leaves open. So on the one hand, it's very dystopic. It's saying things are going to get worse, but only if you look at it in terms of jobs. Because also, all of these people who now will not have jobs will also have time to do other things, which could include revolt.
Yeah, I was reading an interesting little thread on Twitter earlier today, actually, which was about video games. It's about a certain type of video game that is about kind of factory work. You have these games that are about organising a factory, building things well, and doing kind of menial work in a way. And this guy was saying, you can look at this 2 ways. Either you can look at it as it's a problem that people have been trained into enjoying work, that they take it home and do it on their games consoles as well. On the other hand, you could say, well, actually, the problem is that people do enjoy work, and the problem is that your working life has trained the fun out of you, because it's you have to do it for a job, you have to do it under hard conditions and stuff. This kind of made me think of that when I was thinking about the conflict between how much do you enjoy. You have the point where the guy says, I think it's actually that guy Kurt, I'm going to still assume his name is, who says, they come here to make money, not to make glass. Well, of course they fucking come here to make money. I mean, Jesus, what do you expect out of them? And you just show them more respect if you want them to find meaning in making glass.
I know, who the fuck gets joy out of making, working in a factory and making glass? I mean, that's absurd. Of course, that you go in there to make money. It's not your life. But actually, I also do think that certainly what the chairman expects of his workers in China is at least to give the outward appearance and consent to love making glass and to live for the factory itself rather than the individual. And that is a complete contrast in cultures that the film evokes very, very vividly.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing that the people really could take pride in, I think you're shown here, would be the union, and they have that scared out of them too.
Yeah.
Because the people who are fighting to unionise they have real life in them, I think. You know, they enjoy it, they sing the song, the Solidarity Forever and so on. And of course then they lose the votes, 800 odd votes to 400 odd.
Fear wins out.
Yeah.
On that note, highly recommend. It's a truly great film.
Yes,
it is freely available on Netflix if you subscribe.
Yeah, you have to pay for Netflix.
So,
but really worth watching. I really recommend it. And I think it's this and 13th, which was the Ava DuVernay documentary, are these brilliant, concise, so complex documentaries about all these fantastic ideas.
Yes.
And yeah.
So do see it. And thank you for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. Our social media is Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com. Workers of the world unite.
Indeed.